Bill Johnson, you were a public school teacher for 29 years and a teacher educator for another 13 years. Boy, that's a long time.
Yeah.
And I can say with a lot of confidence that you know how the school system works. And to share your experience with us, you wrote a book called Right Time, Right Place. Bill, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
So, Bill, this is, I've been reading your book, and to be honest, I know very little of how the school system works in the United States. I grew up in Colombia, and there it's a poor country, so people had to pay out of their own money to go to school. It's mostly like a private school system,
Mm-hmm.
and the public, there is some semblance of a public school system there, but it's just embarrassing. So
Right.
if a father really cares about, even if they are in poverty, if a father really cares about the education of their kids, they have to put money out of their pocket and send the kid to school. So in the United States, it's different. I also live now here in Canada. Here, there is a general public school system as well. But I wonder, first of all, how do you get into teaching? What is it that inspired you to become a teacher? Because I know that being a teacher nowadays is a difficult career, and I assume it was a difficult career when you got started. I don't know for sure, but I feel like it requires a certain character and a certain amount of compassion to get into this career.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I mean, what, and I put in the book actually, what got me into teaching, I think the first spark was John Kennedy's inauguration back in January 20th, 1961. I grew up on Long Island, and it happened to be a snow day, so I got to stay home and watch the whole inauguration. And when Kennedy used the phrase that everyone knows now of ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country, I actually thought that inspired me. And then as I went to college, I attended Yale in the late 1960s. I graduated in 1971 in the first co-educated class at Yale, which was great. You know, the late 60s, very turbulent time, and there was a lot going on. I had gotten involved in high school in civil rights and things like that, voter registration. So as college wound down, for me, politically and socially and spiritually, it seemed like the only place I could kind of be honest about what I wanted to do was in teaching. And again, in the book, I mentioned a number of times that the public school system in America, James Herndon said this, it's the closest thing we have to a national church. You know, everybody believes in it, everybody goes to it, in varying degrees. And in that sense, I think teaching is almost like a secular clergy. You do, you definitely take a vow of poverty, and you're doing it because you care about you care about kids, but you care about what the public schools are supposed to do for the society. That the whole reason public schools were established in the United States was so that we would have, despite what we're going through right now, we would have an educated and fairly intelligent electorate. And so with all that in mind, that got me into teaching.
Okay, so the audience of this podcast is mostly from the United States. I would say 75% of the
Okay.
listeners are from the US, but there's still a 25% of the listeners who don't know exactly how does the public school system work. And is it only public school, or is there private and public?
Okay.
What's more popular? Yeah.
Okay. Well, so the United States, primarily, most of the children in the United States do go to public schools. One of the problems with public schools is that they're funded locally. And so if you live in an affluent suburb of New York City, for example, you have excellent public schools. If you live in the city, you're less well funded. It's more difficult. The resources are less. But there are private schools, and generally, that's where your top 1% to 5% can go. They're expensive. They're as expensive as universities. Starting in the 1990s, we've had charter schools, one of which, actually a couple of which I was involved in starting, but they've also split between kind of people who see it as a business model of entrepreneurial public schools, to the extreme of some of them being for-profit, to very community-minded parent-teacher partnerships of public schools. And you have parochial schools, in particular Catholic and Jewish parochial schools. So there's a wide range of schools, but depending on your circumstances and where you live and things like that, that determines a lot. But for the most part, the American public school system serves the greatest percentage of our population of students.
And would you say, I mean, from the outside, people see that the American middle class is a big chunk of the population. So would you say that most public schools are more or less at the same level, or is there a great disparity between one and the other one?
Great, that's a great question. There are extreme disparities between, as I mentioned, the wealthy suburbs and in particular cities, which are really hard pressed for the resources necessary. I mean, the New York City school system is 1 million students. Wow. So, how do you serve 1 million students? And particularly if it's a community-based school and you're living in a community that, as you mentioned, is middle class or even lower middle class, the resources aren't there. But overall, I think what's happened over the years, that's the biggest problem, no matter what school you go to, whether even in the affluent suburbs, is that the schools are being asked to do more and more and more of the social work of American society. And so it's not just that we're educating kids, but providing, in wealthy communities in particular, it's daycare to a certain extent. And also there are social emotional needs that now people expect the schools to meet, which, as a teacher, and I can't speak for all teachers, but I can speak for myself. There's just a certain amount of ability you have to deal with the array of problems and or needs that students have. So it's people don't realize how complex and difficult teaching is. For too long, the notion of what a teacher is that it's somebody who stands at the front of the room, particularly secondary school, stands at the front of the room and talks at students who are lined up in desks and listen. And I mentioned this in the book. There are two models. One is called mug and jug, that the teacher is a jug of knowledge and students are empty mugs and you pour the knowledge into them. I like better, Paulo Freire, the Brazilian educational philosopher, called it a banking system, that for throughout the year, the teacher makes deposits, and then at the end of the year, there's a withdrawal in a final exam or a big essay or something like that. But either way, at the end of the year, the kids essentially are empty again. And that's not a good model. Neither of those are good models. And so what I really would like people to understand is how challenging teaching is in terms of recognizing you've got 20 to 30 students in front of you every day, each of whom is an individual, and you want to engage them in learning. You don't want to just stand there. The model we have is medieval. It's when there were very few books and the monks knew the Latin and they read the books and then they told students what the books were about because, Gutenberg hadn't invented the printing press yet. And we still use that model. Universities are rife with it, where you've got professors who are, experts, quote unquote, and they lecture and they lecture and they lecture. And I mean, if you think about it, anything that you really love to do, I'll guarantee you did not learn because someone lectured you about it. If I told you, okay, Elaine, here's how you ride a bicycle. Put your foot on the pedal and swing your leg over, there are we learn by doing. And so the more that teachers can engage students, and I don't care if it's history or mathematics or science, students need to be engaged in problem solving and critical thinking. And that's really just one of the things that teachers have to kind of dedicate themselves to and that's a lot. And right now during this pandemic, the challenge is enormous, where so much of the teaching is what we're doing now, looking at each other in a kind of a Zoom call. And my wife's daughter is a teacher, and she is just brilliant and amazing. We have a couple of friends in California who we speak to regularly, and what they're doing with just technology is stunning to me, that they are keeping kids kind of engaged in learning. But that's the real key and kind of that's what I try to get at in this book as I review my own career, and I look at what I tried to do is, you want to create situations that keep people curious, that keep them wanting to learn and wanting to know more. You want kids to come back each day, and have questions and are curious about what's going on in the world.
Okay, so since your book is kind of a memoir, can you tell us then a little bit of the development of your career? So you see this speech and you decide to do something for your country, and you take this vow of poverty because I assume even at that time it was not well compensated. I'm not sure. You talk about getting your first salary. I think you were being paid $12,000.
Yeah, good memory.
And to you, that was a lot of money.
Right.
So I don't know how much money that was, because that was about 40 years ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, take us through that journey.
Well, yeah, and that was almost 50 years ago. Yeah, with my master's degree, I was making $12,776, which I thought was pretty good because my parents together that year didn't make that much money. So, but I came from a very working class, lower middle class family. But, historically, teachers have not been paid well, and there's a lot of history to why, partially that it was predominantly a female profession, and also that it wasn't seen as, you're not producing something. It's not, in a capitalist system, teaching isn't seen as a productive kind of career. But I did say, I started in the early 70s. I was lucky. I got a job at a school that was opening a brand new high school, Blindbrook Junior Senior High School in Rybrook, New York, a fairly affluent suburb. And it was great because I had a great principal, David Shine, the late David Shine, who was just a brilliant leader. And what was unique at the beginning was the school had no interior walls. So there was an element of it being a real madhouse, but an element of wonderful adventure. And I've got to say, I started teaching that year. I started with 7th and 8th graders, and I still am, thanks to the internet, am in touch with an incredible number of those kids, I call them, but they're approaching 60 years old now. Wow. But anyway, so I started. And Blindbrook was a great opportunity because it gave me a chance to really try getting back to writing the blog. The things I had learned at Colgate, where I got my master's degree, from Carl Rogers, Freedom to Learn, Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, James Herndon's How to Survive in Your Native Land, I was actually able to try and to see, in fact, that what generally is referred to as student-centered learning is really a powerful way to go. And so my career took me from Rybrook. I was there 11 years. Then I went to Boston. I lived in Boston and taught at Winchester High School, which was a big suburban high school. And I happened to get a fellowship for the summer of 1986 and spent it in New York City and decided I really needed to live in New York City. So I moved in 87 to New York City and taught in Bronxville, which is, again, a nice affluent suburb. And part of the reason I did that was because I knew if I taught in Bronxville, I'd make enough money that I could live in New York City. So there was an ulterior motive. But Bronxville was one of the first schools to get involved with the Coalition of Essential Schools, which was a reform group started by Theodore Sizer, who is someone who should be well known in education, but I'm afraid is not as well known as he should be. Theodore Sizer was the head of the education department at Brown. He started the Coalition of Essential Schools, and that's really where my reform career got started. And the coalition was founded on 9 common principles, one of which was student as worker, teacher as coach. I don't want to get into all the details, but it changed really how I was working to make it larger. It wasn't just me in a school. It became more trying to change the school system at large. And it was a national organization. And so that was very exciting. And I did that, started a doctorate at Columbia, and then had an opportunity through Ted Sizer to start one of the first charter schools in Massachusetts, the Francis W. Parker Charter Essential School, which is a mouthful, but it's in its 25th year now and thriving. And it's not like any school you've ever seen. And I would recommend that anybody listening to this go to parkerschool.org and look at that school, because that's how schools should be run. It's not divided up into 8-period days and 4 years based on your date of birth. It's really an interesting place. Being connected with Parker got me into teacher education. There was an opening in the Brown Education Department. I got a chance to work there, and that allowed me not just to continue working with Parker and the Coalition of Essential Schools, but also to help guide young teachers every year. So there's several hundred teachers out there now that I help prepare, which I'm very proud of. And then after doing that and doing it 1 year at Yale, I decided that I really needed to see if what I was telling those teacher education students was the truth. So I moved back to New York City and went back to high school teaching my last 6 years.
Wow.
And happily, I believe I was telling the truth, and it was still fun to be a high school teacher, even at my advanced age at that time.
It sounds like a full career. Okay, so one of my main questions, as I see how difficult is the career of teaching, is why teachers don't get paid more? Because I get the impression that you guys are like a little bit above the poverty level, if not on the poverty level itself. Yet, and I see it as what bigger purpose in society that to prepare the next generation. So, but somehow it's not being valued like that. So what are we getting wrong, or what are you teachers getting wrong that you continue volunteering to do this difficult job for hardly nothing at all?
Yeah, it's there's two sides to that, and I think you asked a really great question. One is kind of what is the quote unquote society getting wrong, and then what are teachers getting wrong? And I think it is there's an answer to each of those. I think this, as I mentioned, I think in society, teaching in the United States anyway is seen as, number one, it was a woman's profession predominantly, so therefore it wasn't valued as much historically. I think the idea that teachers only work 9 or 10 months a year and then have all this, again, quote unquote, vacation time, during which most teachers either work at their school stuff or even work a second job. And it's not valued because, so because historically it didn't make a lot of money, it wasn't seen as a high status job. So it's not seen as, the key thing, and I'm going to shift to answer your second question, is that it's not seen as a white collar profession. It's not seen like lawyers or doctors, or any of the professionals, quote unquote, business people. And here's where I think teachers, to some degree, fumbled the ball, although I don't know if they would have been able to do this, what I propose. When teachers finally organized in the 1960s, starting with Al Shanker in New York in the early 60s, we organized as a labor union and not a professional organization, where doctors have the AMA and lawyers have the American Bar Association. Teachers are a union. And so you immediately set yourself up as a labor group, not a management group, not a professional group. So by not organizing as the Association of Education Professionals, for example, or the Association of Teachers, as a certified, and that's the other part. We get certified by the state, just the same way that plumbers and carpenters and other laboring professions get certified, whereas doctors and lawyers have to pass a bar exam or the med bar equivalent, and the profession certifies the professionals. So we as teachers, even though now there is a national board certification, it's kind of too little too late. So teaching becomes a battle, a labor relations battle as opposed to a professional negotiation. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I'll throw in here that to me is one of the most inane features of the American public school system is that you now have school systems which are multi-million-dollar businesses, essentially, at almost any level, even in small suburbs. It's several $1 million to run a school system. And you let anybody who lives in the town be on the board of directors. You don't have professionals, you don't have professional educators on the board of education. You have plumbers and doctors and dentists and real estate agents who all think they know what school is because they went to school, when in fact they have not been at all prepared as educators to really understand the complexity of what schooling is. They might be great at running a business, and they can do that part of running the budget side of schooling, but they're the people in charge of making policy decisions about what courses are offered, what teachers are hired and kept, things like that. So there's a lot of problems that are historic, that are difficult to change. And just to give you a quick glimpse of the Parker School, the charter school that we started in Devens, Massachusetts back in 1995, 96, the board of directors is composed of teachers and parents whose kids are at the school, as well as some other professional educators. So you've got the community, you've got all the stakeholders are there, and there are student representatives on the board, and students never get a voice. That's another problem with so much that goes on in schools, is the last people that are ever asked anything are the students, and they're the ones who are on the receiving end of it all. So there's a lot wrong. There's a lot that's historic. It would take a tremendous, it really has to do with the will of the people. If education were as important as everybody says it is, because a lot of people give it lip service, then we would show, we would show that we have the will to make things happen, and your defense budget wouldn't be so big, and your education budget would be. So that's my 2 cents, and I'm sticking to it.
Okay, great. So I have a friend. She is a school teacher, and I know that after she finished her shift or whatever, she had to go home and still continue working, and she works until very late at night.
Yes.
So and those hours are not being compensated,
Exactly.
as far as I know. So my next question is, being that it's not a well-paid career, why so many teachers volunteer for this? I mean, it's just, it's a supply and demand thing. If a whole bunch of people offer their service and it's a race to the bottom, they are willing to take whatever salary is on the table, then in a certain way, of course, they're gonna have low salaries.
Yeah, I mean, and that is part of the problem. I mean, number one, I mentioned New York City is a million students, so you need, 250,000 teachers or whatever, and so oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
So part of the problem is when you talk about supply and demand, but I think it speaks to how many people are willing to and care enough about education and care enough about kids that they dedicate themselves to it. And what you mentioned, you know, I once had a parent say to me, well, you only work 180 days a year. And my response was, and I also work 180 nights. And also baseball players only work 180 days a year and they get millions of dollars for it. And are they more important? Is that job more important than what I do?
Right.
But I think that, you know, as I say, because of the numbers and because it's not valued, it speaks to, I think, the incredible dedication teachers have. And what I would add here is the media is a problem for teachers, because if teachers go on strike, very often they're portrayed as villains, because all of a sudden we're not serving our children. And what we go on strike for is more resources for the children. You know, and yeah, it would be nice if we also made more money, but teachers don't ever just strike because of money. And if it's about money, it's about budget regarding how much the school gets, how much we have for books, how much we have for technology. It's not always just a salary issue, although, as you noted, it's a profession that deserves to be compensated. And no good teacher I know doesn't work every night of the week and over. I used to tell my student teacher, when I was a teacher educator, I would tell my student teachers, when they first started doing their student teaching, listen, make sure you take one day over the weekend for yourself and don't do anything related to school. Otherwise you will drive yourself crazy, because that can happen. You get consumed by what you do. And I say that not meaning it's a bad thing, but teachers are incredibly dedicated to their students. And it really is, you know, we lose 20% within the first 5 years of a career. 20% of the people leave. And it's not just because of money. A lot of the times it's because you are just, it's an incredibly demanding job and people burn out. And so it's you know, I guess the big thing I would ask people to do is really think seriously about what education is, and take a look at what your teachers are doing in your community and support them, you know, in any way you can, and you know, and honestly help really support the ones who are clearly the good ones. And I never had a problem with saying, you know, there are some people who shouldn't be teachers. And when I was a teacher educator, I tried to make sure that people who I did not think were good teachers not go into the profession.
Well, I'm going to share an experience that I had with teaching. I used to be the owner of a dance school for adults. But occasionally, a high school would hire us to give a one-day dance workshop for activities, right? Now, when I knew it was kids, I would triple my price, because I knew how much work, additional work, that would be to a regular class that I was teaching. And after finishing my day, it would be like 2 or 3 days workshop to entertain the kids. I always used to say to myself, I didn't charge enough.
Yeah. It is. It's exhausting, and it's you know, I in the book there's a comment, a quote from a man named Quinn that says, you know, if a doctor, lawyer, or dentist had 30 people that they had to treat at the same time, you know, and each of those people had individual needs, and some of them were making trouble. And if you had to do that professionally as a, you know, as a competent professional for 10 months, you know, then doctors, lawyers, dentists would have some idea of what teachers do every day. And it really is, it's an incredible challenge, and it's exhausting. It's physically exhausting. You know, I used to say that going back to school in September was like spring training. You had to get in shape again for dealing with the energy level of kids, the amount of energy you had to put into planning and executing those plans. And and the other part of it, in too many schools, teachers are really isolated. You know, you work individually. You work essentially as an independent contractor. And one of the things we know is that people do better when they collaborate. You know, that you've got more brains to pick, that you get more energy when you're working as a team. When I was at Brown, we were a very small, the teacher preparation program started out, we were only 4 people, but our planning sessions were so energetic, and we sat in and watched each other teach. We helped each other out. Being able to do that makes a huge difference. And too often teachers are separated, and then you get a sense of competition. You know, I don't want Elaine's class to be better than my class, you know, and I don't want the kids liking him more than, and it shouldn't be that. You know, we're in it all together, and it's difficult. There's a lot of historical factors that get in the way, and you know, we could be doing a better job.
Okay, so I have heard here and there that the Scandinavian countries are doing a good job in teaching, that teachers are well compensated, that is a high status jobs, that teachers are respected. First of all, is there any truth in that? And then secondly, what could schools could be doing better right now to provide better education to the students and better conditions for the teachers?
Oh boy. Okay. Number one, yeah, I think a number of European countries are doing better, and that's because, you know, they, like their healthcare systems, they're socialized. Mm. And, you know, I know that's a horrible word to use in the United States of America, but the fact is we've got Social Security, we've got Medicare, we've got a lot of socialized things that people, you know, once we have it, oh boy, that's a great thing. And so I think that what you're talking about in those countries, and teachers are compensated and respected more, but part of that has to do with, again, a national outlook that it is an important profession, that it deserves to be compensated, and that it's part of a national commitment. You know, part of what the problem we have in the United States is that education is balkanized. You know, it's not just that each state has its own state education department, but every town has its own board of education. And so it's very hard. And you know, I'm not saying the federal government should take it over, but I think we need to look at ways to better organize and standardize some of the things that go on in education. I think what could be done locally and statewide is to really listen to teachers. Teachers are not consulted about what goes on in schools, and too often we're the last to know, or we're being told, here's the new curriculum, here's the new test that you've got to prepare kids for. And I think that, and again, this gets back to that unionization problem and the fact that it's not a respected profession, et cetera, et cetera. But there are, every school I've ever been in has more than a handful of incredibly intelligent people who are really great educators and thoughtful. And I think that if we don't recognize that those people, the people who are in direct contact with kids every day, who are in direct contact with other teachers every day, you know, if those people aren't consulted and listened to, genuinely listened to, we're really missing the boat. And to organize education the way corporations are organized, that there's essentially a CEO and you work your way down to middle management, which are principals and department chairs and all that. And then finally you get to the teachers at the bottom who are, you know, essentially the laborers, and not, you know, go bottom up and find out what's going on in classrooms, what do teachers need, what are they thinking, what do they think would be the best way to do certain things, what would be the best way to organize our school. That was the great thing about the Parker School. And again, I'll make another plug for www.parkerschool.org. If you want to see how you can organize a school differently. Also, the Blackstone Academy in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, which I was the founding president of, and is essentially an urban model of the Parker School is kind of a rural suburban charter school, whereas Blackstone Academy is an urban model. But those are schools that really, the voices of teachers are heard. They're heard in consultation with parents and students. And I think that's what really would be a shot in the arm to the American education system.
One of the biggest problems right now, social problems, is income inequality. Could you paint a picture, let's say, which I'm not, let's say I was part of the 1% and I want the best education for my kid compared to somebody else who live in a, let's say, poor neighborhood and I just, you know, I just go to wherever is there available. Can you paint the contrast between these two kind of educations that these two kids will get?
Sure. I mean, and I think a lot of people could tell you, you know, the 1% or even the top 5% can send their school kids to very elite private schools, the Phillips Andover, Phillips Exeter, schools like that, and which will give their kid a leg up into getting into Ivy League colleges and all that. So, I mean, when I got to Yale in 1967, it was still an all-male school, and we had out of a class of 1,000, we had 50 out of 1,000 that went to 2 prep schools, Phillips Andover and Phillips Exeter. And those guys already knew their way around. They knew where the bookstore was going to be. They knew how to live on their own. You know, I had come from, you know, my parents' household. I had never been away from home really, and needed to learn just how to even sign up for classes and things like that. So being able to send your kid to an elite private school gives them a leg up in a number of ways, not to mention the networking and the connections and the, you know, that kind of thing. If you're a middle class or lower middle class kid, you go to your local public school. And again, if you're lucky, it's a good school with good teachers, but you've got, for example, even at the last high school I worked at in the city, which was a great school, and it was small, which is something that's very important, I think. But our college placement people each had 50 to 100 kids that they had to deal with every year. You know, at these elite schools, every kid gets kind of an individual plan, and here's, you know, here are the colleges to look for. So just the numbers game in public schools is part of the problem. And getting back to what we were talking about earlier, as far as resources, if money were allocated so that you had more people, more adults to work directly with students, I think, you know, I think there are too many layers of administration and things like that make a lot of money, by the way. You know, one of the things I write in the book is that if you're not a particularly good teacher, or you don't particularly like spending all day with kids, you can become an administrator and make more money. And so I spent portions of my career where I knew the guy or woman who was my, you know, evaluator, principal or vice principal, assistant principal, had only spent 3 or 4 years in the classroom and then become an administrator. And they're observing my class and they're going to give me feedback. And not that I didn't value it, I would listen to it, but I also knew that I had given a lot more thought and knew a lot more about what I was doing than what they were telling me. And so the system is really set up in a way that, you know, you make more money if you move up into administration. And not that those are easy jobs, but I think we've got to look at how we allocate resources, and do we really need as many people who have a single office and deal with kids one at a time, or people who are out there working with groups of kids and guiding kids on a greater basis.
Well, okay, Bill, this have opened my eyes to how the school system works. Could you tell the listeners one more time the name of your book and where they can follow you or find out more about the work that you do? And yeah, that's...
Okay, yeah, and thanks. I really appreciate that. The book is called Right Time, Right Places, One Teacher's School Reform Journey. You can get it on Amazon. If you go to Educator Biography and look up my name, Bill, B-I-L, 1L, B-I-L, Johnson, J-O-H-N-S-O-N, in Educator Biographies on Amazon, or you can go right to Adelaide Books, A-D-E-L-A-I-D-E Books. And also Smash Books has an ebook. If people want to go to smashbooks.com to get an ebook copy of it. My website is Leave the Gun, Take the Cannoli. But you can just go to Bil Johnson, B-I-L-J-O-H-N, SON lowercase.com, and you'll get to my website. And that's where my blog, which is called The Blast, is located. And I would love to hear from people. My email address is all over the place, any of those sites. And I really appreciate your doing this. This has been great fun. And I appreciate it. And I hope we get to do it again sometime.